Well, hello everybody. We are excited to welcome you to McTee Auditorium on March 19th for a program of music by Cindy McTee, Alan Hovhaness, and Sergei Rachmaninoff, including his ever-popular Piano Concerto No. 3. We are going to resume our pre-concert talks with the April concert, but for this concert, as we are still thinking about limiting to some extent the amount of time that we interact with one another in the same space and so on, we thought we would offer these comments ahead of time by video for those of you that are interested in knowing a little bit more about how the piece or how the program came together. So you will notice when you get there that we have a screen in front of the orchestra for the first half of the program. So, I've always been interested in the ways in which we can give people what I call entry points, additional entry points into having a relationship with a piece of music, and different ways to understand it and different ways to kind of get inside it and connect with it. One of those ways certainly is with a visual element. And since time immemorial, composers have written music that choreographers, let's say, in the case of ballet, have transformed or translated into a visual medium like movement, dance. Well, more recently, the opportunity exists for video artists to do much the same kind of thing. There exists so much music out there that is sound, abstract sound in many cases. What might a visual artist think of or imagine in his or her mind that is a visual counterpart or an extension maybe of the music? And that's the question that we're asking in this first half. And so the Boulder Phil co-commissioned two video artists to create a video counterpoint to two very different pieces of music. So first we have music by Cindy McTee called Circuits, Circuits, Circuits. This is a piece that lasts about 5.5 minutes, very high energy. The term circuits, I think, can be considered in a number of ways. On the one hand, it probably conjures the idea of electrons flowing very rapidly in some kind of electrical circuit, or maybe through semiconductors, this sort of thing. On the other hand, there is a kind of circularity or a repeated pattern that we hear musically. There are the very opening idea played by the violins is expanded and later turns into a 27-note pattern in the basses and cellos, which kind of underscores everything that goes on for the rest of the piece. You don't necessarily consider it a 27-note pattern as you're hearing it, but that's structurally what's going on. It kind of repeats and circles around, if you will, in a circular fashion. So this piece is going to be presented with a visual work by Alexey Moriarty. He is a video artist who has worked on a lot of Hollywood films. The Matrix is one that comes to mind. He's worked with Industrial Light and Magic, George Lucas's group. And I approached him about this piece because I was familiar with another work that he had done that was highly abstract, geometric. And so he created a video that you'll see that is actually very interesting. It is, he created certain kind of visual modules that related to various motives and musical gestures in the piece. And once he had created those, maybe a half dozen or so of them, he simply used the music itself as a template for where we would see what. In other words, where we had this kind of melodic motive going on, we would see, visual A. And then when the second motive came along, we would see visual B. And when they were superimposed on each other musically, he would superimpose them visually as well. And there is a very, very tight correspondence then between the visuals and the music. It's almost as if you are seeing a graphic representation of the structure of the piece on the screen, rather than an impression of it, let's say, which would be another approach one might take. And I think that's closer to the approach that we have in the second piece, the second video. So the second work is by Alan Hovhaness, an American composer who, Cindy McTee, by the way, is a living American composer. Alan Hovhaness is no longer living, but had a long and important career, wrote 67 numbered symphonies. This is number 2. which is subtitled Mysterious Mountain. It's a work that he wrote back in 1955, I believe it was, for the inaugural concert of Leopold Stokowski, who was the new music director of the Houston Symphony at the time. And Stokowski approached Hovhaness about writing a work for that event. Stokowski, is also the one who suggested that Hovhaness give it a title. He thought that it would capture people's imaginations a little better if he did that. And so that's essentially where the title Mysterious Mountain came from. So apparently then, Hovhaness wrote it as a piece of absolute music and then later gave it the title. And actually an opus number, by the way, which is also essentially made up. So this piece, though, became very, very popular. It was broadcast live back in the day that they would do those kinds of things on a radio network. And it then quickly, the next several years, was premiered by many, many important orchestras around the country. And in the 50s in particular, it stood out as a piece of music that was highly listenable, highly tonal, and rather friendly towards audiences, you might say. The piece, as you will hear, is in 3 movements. The first movement has a kind of, it feels very relaxed, almost meditative, I think one could say, and without a real strong sense of pulse. The second movement, however, is a double fugue. The first subject of the fugue is something that sounds like it could be either from the Renaissance or from, let's say, the Far East. It's a pentatonic kind of melody, but it has a modality. It feels like it's sort of a Renaissance theme, at least to me. And then later, that is superimposed on a second theme that is being treated fugally. Actually, that's a theme that he wrote in a string quartet some years ago that he repurposed for this symphony. But eventually, we have sort of a long note theme, almost like what you would hear in an organ work for, you could imagine one manual playing this sort of while something much busier is going on, let's say with the left hand and another manual and maybe even with the pedals. So that's contrapuntally quite complex, that second movement. The third movement then returns us a little bit more to the feeling of the first movement, a little bit more just meditative, I guess, is the way I would think of it. There's a kind of ostinato feel that kind of keeps going. The harp plays that, and then above that, again, we have some longer sustained notes. The overall feel of this piece, I think, is spiritual. It is almost new age, you might say. Even though it was written back in the 1950s, it still feels kind of contemporary, at least to me. But it very much has a spiritual feel to it. And in fact, Hovhaness was very interested in matters of that nature, particularly in Eastern religions and so on. But I think the idea of a mountain for him being a kind of spiritual portal between this world and some higher spiritual plane, higher figuratively and perhaps literally as well, a kind of transcendent space, mountains being this kind of place where these two worlds intersect a little bit. I think that's the feel that he was going for, even if he hadn't consciously decided on that title when he was writing the music. So that's the music. The visuals that you will see are provided by a man named Stephen Elias. Now, Stephen Elias is a composer primarily. In fact, we've done several of his works, one of which we took to the Kennedy Center. That was part of our appearance there a few years back. And in both of the cases of works of his that we have done, he has provided visual elements. The first case, Gates of the Arctic, it was, as I recall, primarily still photos that were kind of slightly moving from one to the other as the music dictated. Explored a little bit more of the video element in the second, which is all the songs that nature sings, that piece based on Rocky Mountain National Park. So I approached him about the possibility of creating a visual element for not his own music now, but somebody else's, in the case of Hovhaness. And what we have is as I said, a very different approach to what we have from Alexey Moriarty. Alexey's is highly geometric, abstract, very, very fast. Stevens is, I think, much more representational. We have photos and video of actual outdoor scenes. Of course, it unfolds more slowly and more in a more relaxed fashion as the music does. But he also introduces, does Stephen, elements of transition between these actual photos, as I mentioned, or video, and kind of a computer-generated, well, just exploration of some of those shapes, let's say. Sometimes we have just an outline that appears on the screen, which is, a video effect, but it then relates, as we later see, to something that we're about to view, this whole mountain scene, let's say. It's a really fascinating video, and these two approaches could not be, as I said, more different, just as these two works could not be more different musically as well. So then, it's a relatively short first half, just about 20, although it's a symphony by Hovhaness, it's only about 20 minutes long. So we're going to take a brief intermission, and then we will hear Terence Wilson play for us the third piano concerto of Rachmaninoff, one of the real gems of the piano concerto repertoire, one of the most difficult pieces in the repertoire for sure, but just full of all of the wondrous writing that endears Rachmaninoff to the public. Just a real gift for melody, as well as a kind of tinged with melancholy sometimes in a really wonderful way. He wrote this when he was still young. Just let's see, about 1906. He would have been 30. Let me get this right. 33, 34, or something like that. But it's already his third piano concerto, and he'd written at least 2 symphonies by that point, a number of important songs. He wrote this for his first American tour, and the premiere was given here in the U.S. on his tour in the 1906 or 1907, as I recall. So it opens not with a grand pronouncement from either the orchestra or the soloist. In fact, the orchestra plays a kind of a murmuring accompaniment, clarinets, cellos, and so on. Then the piano comes in not with chords, but with a melody played in octaves. It feels almost like it could be a chant melody, and you heard that the range of it is not very large. It's not even a fifth, it's just a tritone there. And this melody then becomes the jumping off point for much of the most of the rest of the first movement anyway. The second movement has a middle section, which is in F sharp minor, and the orchestra plays kind of a boom chuck chuck accompaniment, like that. And the piano, the soloist, then begins to play this really rapid figuration over the top of that, which I will not attempt to do at the speed in which he will play it. But if you slow it down enough, at a tempo that I can play, you actually discover that he's playing. But again, it's so much of a blur at the real tempo that you would probably never notice that. But that is very clearly related to from the first movement. So I love those kinds of details. That's the sort of thing Brahms does all the time, where he gives you a particular motive that is used in augmentation, in other words, stretched out, or diminution, like this, kind of squeezed down. Sometimes it's the melody, sometimes it's the accompaniment. So I just love that sort of detail. The last movement then, sort of more of a fanfare feel, I should say. That sort of thing. Brings a very rousing conclusion to the piece, whereas we had a lot of smooth stepwise motion in the first movement. Now we have more leaps and jumps here in the last movement. It's full of incredible pyrotechnics along the way, in spite of the fact that it begins so rather modestly and simply at the beginning. And it's going to be played for us by Terence Wilson, one of the great living American pianists. He joined us for the Grieg concerto relatively early in my time with the Boulder Phil. It's sort of been probably 13 years ago, something like that at this point. So I'm very glad that he's able to join us for this. I know you're going to enjoy his take on this concerto, and I hope that you will find the whole evening a really nicely rounded experience with these two opening works that have visual components, and then this well-loved and deservedly so classic on the second half that features this fantastic guest artist. Our Boulder Phil is excited to be on stage again, to have you joining us, and we look forward to seeing you at McTee Auditorium.